And we are in. So we're going to get right into this today. We're not going to bother with an introduction because nobody watches them anyway. So we're going to talk about what's going on in the greenhouse, and then we'll move over to the hothouse. I expect them to be two separate videos, but we'll see as things develop. So we'll start off with the Mandevilla. Now the Mandevilla in the corner here, this one is Mandevilla sanderi. It's doing much better now that the temperatures are higher. I would even go as far as to say that the temperatures on a night time here are not low enough for the heaters to come on. Now my heaters come on about 7-8 degrees Celsius. There is definitely a difference in terms of blooming power. It isn't anywhere near as nice as it normally is. It has got quite a number of yellowing leaves, probably because it's still going down to about 10 degrees Celsius on a night time. It still can do, even though we're in June, we're in the middle of June. So I'm happy that it's come back. I really would have liked it to have been as good as it normally is, and as soon as I get the opportunity to, as soon as the electricity prices go down, then I will increase the temperature in here again. But for now I have to make do with what I have to make do with. Speaking of Mandevillas, I also have, remember those seeds that I sowed? Well, a couple of the seedlings here are now growing up this trellis here. There's another one over there. And I also have another Mandevilla over here. This one is another different hybrid, I believe, and I'm going to grow this one up this side of the greenhouse. So I'll just have a quick look what this one is. So this one is, it still says Diplodenia, but it's Mandevilla sanderi rosea. So that should be slightly different. Looking at the blooms, they're obviously red, but they look a lot smaller. We'll see. Anyway, we'll see what happens to that one. So we've got a number of things to talk about over here in the greenhouse. One of the things is this Pelargonium Anside Fringed Aztec. Now, I did mention at some point that the flowers were different, so I want to show you something. Now, this was partly diseased. I had to root prune it early in the season, just as it was, oh, it's dripping, just as it was about to bloom. Part of it just completely died off and it looked like it had some kind of disease, so I chopped it off. I cut that part of the root off and it's still flowered very nicely for me. I hope nothing terrible is going to befall this plant because I love this one. Now have a look at this bloom. So this is how it's come through this year, but if you look at this one here, this is how it's supposed to be. So notice how it's got the red in the middle and it kind of fades into the white, whereas these ones over here, there is no fading into white. It's almost all pink round the edges, and that's the difference. So whether that's the disease that's caused that, I mean, it is rather nice, and I know that there are plants that they're kind of propagated with a disease. I think certainly some tulips, some kind of virus, and that is what people buy into. That's what they like. I'm watering all of these now by bottom watering methods in an attempt to rid myself of fungus gnats, but also because I believe that's the better way to do it. And I have to say, it does seem to be working pretty well. I have just watered that one, that's why that one's dripping. So we've got the beautiful Streptocarpus Bethan there. I had another diseased Pelargonium over here, which I managed to cut out most of the dead bits, and it was pretty much stripped back to just one or two of these tiny little leaves, but that's come back for me now, fortunately. So we have a Dracula Chimera, which is going to bloom. Some of these at least come into fruition. My problem is at this time of year, you can see another one that's just died off there. This one has blasted, another one has blasted, which I cut off. The problem is trying to keep it cool enough. As I said, the temperatures can drop at night time, but this doesn't want it to be really hot in here. It certainly doesn't want it to be 30 odd degrees. At the moment, we've got the sun out, we've got 29 degrees in here at the moment. The sun isn't out for very long, for very many days, but when it does come out, because of the way that the greenhouse is orientated, it's kind of southwards orientated, so this whole side section points to the south, so when the sun does come out, it does make it very, very hot. So a couple of things to look at over here. So this is one of my Impatien, it's not a species, it's a hybrid, but it's an Impatiens. This one is Oricoma crossed with, I'm trying to read it, bicordata. This one's looking really healthy. First blooms on it there for me, a couple of little orange things, 2 or 3 there about to bloom. It's looking nice and healthy. I love the red stem on it, it's very sturdy, it's certainly very thirsty at the moment, nice and green. However, the other one, which you have seen, this one is niamniamensis or niamniamensis. So beautiful flowers on it, really nice. This is the parrot plant. But look at the leaves. Now the leaves, if I didn't know any better, I would say that that is an indication of some kind of sapsucker, like the usually kind of spider mite. You can see the almost chlorotic in appearance, you know, very, very yellowy, green veins sticking out. However, you know, it's such a young plant, I wouldn't expect it to be lacking in iron at this stage. It's a pretty fresh media, and I know that it's not got spider mite, so I'm not really sure whether it's perhaps the light, even though it was there, and I've just moved it to there because it's then directly underneath one of the grow lights, which I've just turned off. So I'm going to try that, see what happens to that, see if we can get it to green up a little bit. So what happened with my Bougainvillea brasiliensis? Well, I have repotted it. However, when I came back from holiday, it was totally, well, pretty much defoliated. As you can see, there's just one or two hanging on, and even those look like they are almost wilted. Now, I know it's not wilting because it's lacking in water. It definitely was when I came back from holiday. Can't blame anybody, it's just one of those things, and it is a really awkward plant in the greenhouse. It just doesn't want to grow for me. We have a few kind of sickly looking bracts at the top. I really should prune it down, but I just wanted to see what happens. As I said before, I've got a couple of Mandevilla there, the species Mandevilla laxa, that I'm going to grow up that section anyway. And I'm also thinking now, I wonder whether I should try a completely different hybrid altogether. There is one that I'm aware of that is in possession of an award of garden merit from the RHS, and I think that's something like Bougainvillea Poulton's Dream or something along those lines. Poulton rings a bell. I'm not so sure about the second word, I don't know. So I'm waiting to see whether this actually starts to sprout again. I'm just looking carefully. It is actually, it's beginning to come back with some new shoots, so maybe we'll rescue it. Maybe the repotting might have helped. Again, I expect these to do better root bound, that's the general advice, but mine wasn't doing particularly well root bound, so I thought I'd try something else. That's all you can do, keep trying these things. So my Phragmipedium, I've already cut one bloom off this just because it was looking so bad with the leaves. I'm really pinning my hopes on these new leaves, the new shoots here, that these are in a better shape than the last ones were. I think I'll leave that now, it's looking reasonable. My favourite fern, so this is Pteris quadriorita. I love this because the new fronds, they're almost bronze, they're almost gold in certain lights. Certainly some of the photos I've taken look like they are gold. Beautiful thing, completely, again, lost all the fronds because it was in the wrong place. And now that I've got it in the right place, it's coming back again for me, which is really, really satisfying. So Tradescantia, this was sold to me as nanouk lilac. I believe they all end up as cerinthoides in the end, once the PGRs have worn off. So we've got a little experiment running here. So we've got this one in a terracotta pot, which I have it on good authority that prevents some of those leaves browning or some of the brown spots. This one is in a plastic pot, but I am beginning to think now that they will all do this, just as the Tradescantia zebrina plant, and I'll just whiz you around here to show you, just as Tradescantia zebrina, completely cut all that back by the way, begins to get these dead leaves higher up. Why do they do that? Well, they do it because they don't want to grow in a pot, basically. They want to grow out in the open, and they want to root at each node as they go along. We stop them rooting at each node, and because of that, once the stems get a certain length, they kind of run out of steam and they lose the leaves higher up. Now, the usual solution to that is to take a stem cutting here, pop it back in the pot, and then it will begin to fill up that space again, which is perfectly fine. But I'm just wondering whether that's the same thing at work here over with Tradescantia cerinthoides. Is it just simply that it wants to root as these stems here get longer, it wants to put down new roots and give it a new boost? Is that why we get all these browning leaves? Could be worth a little experiment there. So glutton for punishment here. I've had an hibiscus before. This one is sinensis sprinkle rain, and this one has actually tried to bloom, but I keep cutting them off, and the reason for that is I want it to get established first. You can see a couple of yellowing leaves already. What keeps happening with this? Well, we've got a case of fungus gnats in there as well, despite me actually treating them. I think these ones that are flying about, hopefully that no new ones will come up, or even if they do lay some eggs, I'll just keep treating them. I treat every single plant constantly now for the fungus gnats. I just keep popping these tablets into the watering just to make sure that they don't build up populations again. So this has already had green fly, which the last one had. I don't know whether we're going to get any strong growth on it. It keeps wanting to bloom and I keep preventing it, and it keeps wanting to get infestations of green fly and I keep rubbing them all off. So we'll see what happens. It would be nice to get that to bloom for me. I've had them in the house, no problem whatsoever. As soon as I bring it in the greenhouse, not quite the same thing. Maybe it's the fluctuations in temperatures. Doing really well in the nepenthes. This one's Rebecca Soper, just keeps popping open new pictures, no problem with that, that's all running fine. So we've got A&E in the corner here, which I've mentioned before. I'm only going to show you one actually. So this is what I'm looking for. So this is a twinkle, and you can just about see, if you really squish your eyes up, can you just see that little root there popping out? This is what I'm after, and I want to actually monitor it as it's going along. So they're all just kind of sitting here in the media, or on top of the media in fact, and all it is a little bit of moss. And the idea is that as soon as I get some roots, I can keep wetting underneath and I can let it dry out properly, because as you know, if you follow my channel, the biggest problem with orchids for me through those long winter months is rotting. So I've got to come up with some solution to try and get them to dry out, and my solution at the moment is to take the guesswork out of it and not enclose them in a pot, just rest them on top of a little bit of sphagnum moss and keep lifting them and checking for roots. And that's what I'm going to do. Let's see if that works. So over here next to the fern over here, the asparagus fern, we have load of cyclamen. So I'm trying to get them to go dormant. Never had any problem with this before. However, these two don't want to go dormant for whatever reason, even though they're not been watered. There's a couple there that have kind of gone dormant and then decided they're going to chuck up some new growth. Again, a little bit bizarre. But you know, it's just one of those things, isn't it? When you're playing with dormancy, they're not in a natural situation. So I don't want them to desiccate, you see. This is the problem. I've lost them in the past by allowing them to completely dry out to the point that they are bone dry for months. And in doing that, I have lost some plants, and I don't want to do that this time. I've repotted quite a number of them here. They've never had a repot before, certainly for a long time anyway. This is my giant one here, which has grown over the years, and since I repotted it, it's chucked up another couple of leaves. But I'm not worried about that. I'm just not, you know, it has got a little bit of water in there, but I'm not going to water it again. I just don't want it to desiccate. So I'll give them a little bit, and then I'm going to leave them. Same with these. I've given them a tiny little bit, and then I'm going to leave them for ages and try and get them to turn yellow like this and lose the blooms. This poor thing over here was one of my new Pelargoniums from Fibrex. That didn't make it, to be honest. It never looked like it was going to. So let's just move on over here. So we've got some lovely things going on over here. So we've got another fabulous Pelargonium here. It's definitely the season for them. So that's Kamal. I did have Kamal once before. Hopefully this one survives. It sounds like today it's all about death and destruction. Streptocarpus are now beginning to throw up some gorgeous blooms for me and looking nice and green and healthy. So we know this one is, that one's about, they're going to fall off there, aren't they? This one, there you go, straight off in my hand, and that one's probably going to do the same. So this one is the absolutely incomparable Kalahari. Gorgeous thing, really, really nice. I've had another, well, not really a few problems, but I've got a number of species. You can just about see these small leaved Pelargoniums, really tiny leaf one there. There's another one up there. And again, they're normally in bloom by now, but the temperatures, the nighttime temperatures are just preventing them from doing that. Nice one here just coming out. This one is Tornado, a new one for me. It did have a better display of blooms quite recently, but it's got some aphids on it, which I've hopefully managed to squish. And that's the reason, isn't it? That's the reason. It's all open. This is why we have aphids and bugs coming in, and I've no way around that unless I got an air conditioning system. And just imagine how much that would cost, bearing in mind how much it's costing me already. Don't talk about this one in the corner very often. This one is a clivia. I had that from a very, very small plant, but it's really put some growth on this year, so I'm hoping to get one of those fabulous clivia blooms at some point. Nepenthes again are looking fabulous. So this one, lovely big pictures on this one. This is Lowii crossed with ventricosa. I think that's probably my favourite at the moment. Really nice hourglass shape to it. Beautiful, beautiful peristome there. Gorgeous colours on it. And then we have the usual Gaia. And over here we've got Berkii. I always get those two mixed up. We've got them right today for some reason. Berkii there, throwing up some nice new growth. What else have we got to look at over here? Worth mentioning, another begonia down here. This was Fuchsioides. Didn't like the lower temperatures. Really knocked it back by several months. I'm hoping that's going to come back to life for me. And I have one that's going to come into bloom here. This is an orchid. So this is the, what do you call this one? Prosthecea radiata. I know that's had a few names, hasn't it? It did have a number of spikes coming on it, but they all seem to have blasted. That one looks like it's going to make it. What else have we got over here? Tradescantia sillamontana. Don't talk about this one much. Again, this is one that really loves dry, doesn't love lots of humidity. It rots very easily, and you can literally water it and it'll rot. So the way I deal with it is I hardly ever water it. When I say hardly ever water it, I mean like once every couple of months. I almost treat that one like I would treat a succulent or a cacti. It really doesn't like loads of water in this environment. But for me, it's great actually because it keeps it nice and small, keeps it manageable, and I have that nice plant to look at. We've got some Venus flytraps down here. These took a hit mainly because they were actually in too low amount of water, and whenever I repotted those, I must have put some crocs in the bottom for some silly reason, and that meant that like the bottom part of it wasn't getting the moisture. I only noticed when the moss started to die off. But anyway, they've come back great now. I really like that red in there, that's looking great, and these could really do with going outside. But as you can see, they're still catching food because, you know, the greenhouse is open at this time of year. So over here we have another fern. So this is Adiantum radianum. I love this thing. When it's growing well, it's looking really nice, especially those really black stems with the fresh green foliage. Love that. Does tend to go brown in places, and I put that down to the fact that I've got the fan over there. I know I have another fern over here, so this one is another terrace, and this one does do pretty well down here. It likes it down there, but what it doesn't like is the fan. I'll just swing you around here so I can see it. So it's got nice new growth on it, but the fronds here with the brown on them, that comes from the fan. I keep kind of trying to kick the fan up a bit so that it's pointing to the sky more. So over here we've got some orchids in bloom, Dendrobium cuthbertsonii. That one's doing okay. This one actually managed to escape the death of winter. The others didn't, unfortunately, but at least we've got some nice new growth on there, so that's coming good, okay. Lots and lots going on in the Drosera here. You've seen this before, but it's always worth showing. Just look at that tangled web. Absolutely fabulous. Lots and lots of growth over on the Cephalotus follicularis. In fact, they're going to flower. I'm probably going to cut them off. I like them for a little while. I actually prefer the flower spikes to the flowers. Now look at this one. Now I've shown you this not that long ago, but look how much growth it's put on. This is the King Sundew. It's just suddenly decided, after being like almost microscopic for months, right, I'm going to really go for it now. And it has. And it's catching its prey and it's beginning to go for it. All looking really nice. Very happy with that. The Capensis one is going to bloom over there. We're a little bit in danger here of some of these Capensis seedlings overtaking the Hamiltonii. What else is going on over here? So lots of streps in bloom, and look how green they are. They're looking so green because they get a feed, and I use these tablets that come from Dibley's. They send out these tablets. Obviously you've got to order them, but you can get them online, and they last for an entire month. So that means that you can, you know, give yourself a little diary note and make sure that you give them what they need. And I think since I've started doing that, they're looking a lot better. Yes, they're slow, but that's because of the temperatures. We've got Texas hot chili about to bloom. Somebody mentioned that they had that. That one's looking great. The Harlequin blue. Beautiful flowers coming out here. This one is popcorn. It does seem to be a double. I thought it was going to open up a bit more. Falling Stars is looking much better now. It's getting a lot more blooms on it. I have had a bit of a problem with green fly over here. If you do have Streptocarpus, the aphids prefer to go on the blooms, the underside of the blooms and the bloom stalk. They don't go on the leaves, so you tend to miss them. It's only really the little, you know, the little white dead bodies that you see. That tends to be what I first notice when, you know, they've got an infestation. But for me, it's a constant thing. I've got to keep looking at this stuff. So over here we've got a unifoliate. I've talked about this Streptocarpus unifoliate before. Looking better now. Only flowers once. I believe this can go several feet, in fact, and I've had this since 2021, January 2021, so it's quite a while. This one did actually, you know how Streptocarpus do this, you almost get a line across the leaf and the latter half of it just completely dies off. Well, I cut that off, but the whole thing started growing itself. You can see where I cut it off, how jaggedy it is. I cut it off, it was almost up to there, but the whole leaf has carried on growing and you would hardly know now. Once it's flowered, it dies. So, you know, I want to see them, but I probably really would like this leaf to be a bit bigger. I have only fairly recently repotted it, well, fairly recently in January, a few months ago, 6 months ago. That needs a water, by the way, just reminded myself. Okay, so that's what's going on in the greenhouse. I don't think I've missed anything. If I have, please shout out in the comments and tell me. This Coleogenes speciosa really needs a repot now. You can see it's climbing out of the pot. It's not flowered for me this year yet. I'm not sure this one is actually benefiting from my spraying method. I think this one did actually like a really good soak, but I'm spraying everything at the moment. I'm just using the pump action sprayer for orchids because I'm so wary of them actually dying off, and plus it's really easier for me to do. It's a much quicker job. So what we're going to do next is we're going to head over to the hothouse. If you're into houseplants, even though I would argue that all of these in here will actually grow in some part of a house and still, because they're all tropical, could be classed as houseplants, but people tend not to grow the majority of them, maybe with the exception of the Streptocarpus and 1 or 2 begonias. The majority of them I expect would be either outside just during the summer months, or they just would think that you can't grow them in a house, but you can. However, having said that, the hothouse, everything is over 17 degrees, so you would definitely expect that to be a place where you would grow houseplants, even though it's not really in the house. So that's where we're going to head over to, and that will be on the next video. So give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Write in the comments anything that springs to mind. Love to talk to people, love to discuss all the nerdy plant things that's going on here and on your side of the water as well. And for now, I'll see you on the next one. Bye.